Hey y'all, welcome back to another Culture Attack game dev tutorial. This is Twin B Perfect Selection we're streaming today, and we're going to be talking about game cameras for 3D games. We're also going to do a little bit of like 3D movement in there, because that's an important part of that. There's a lot of good stuff online already for this, so it's my main reason is showing you why and how I do certain things maybe a little bit differently, and then again to have all the code in one spot, so when you go searching for things like that, you know, it just comes up how you might want it. So this will probably be pretty quick. I'm going to explain some of the code, again some of the reasons for how I do certain things, rules of thumb that I follow, why I follow them, and get it going. So, you know, 3D camera here, it's a lot like Dark Souls. You know, there's things that I thought would be good because they worked in Aces Wild, but they're not so good for 3D. You know, they can be in certain situations, but, you know, again, we'll get to it. So you know, we have a movement, it's relative to the camera. Their left stick, right stick, lets us orbit around the character. You know, basic stuff, but it's real good, and hopefully my implementation here gives you some flexibility to modify it in ways that are helpful for you. So let's just go through the setup first. I almost forgot that last time when I was getting prepared here. With my setup, I have my camera prefab here. It's a game object. There's no camera on the parent object, just the script that I'll be providing. It has a child called the rig. Oh, whoops, gonna unlock that. It doesn't have much going on by itself, but we're going to be modifying that a lot to do the actual like, transformations and stuff. Well, there's different approaches to it, but I have these two separate, and I'll show you why. Scene camera is also a parent, or excuse me, a child. The reason is so I can do screen shakes without messing up like the rig position. So I can like shake this around and not worry about like my orbiting and things like that. There's gonna be, I thought it was called saddle is what I called it. Here, I'm always settling the local position, you know, back to 0. So when I do the shakes, it always just returns itself. It's a bit of an aside. Let's actually get to it. So the reason we have this set up separate is you don't want to rotate a camera to look at it. You want, like, to look at something, you want to have your focal point and then orbit around that thing. You know, it's really common nowadays, but it's like a lesson that had to be learned, you know what I mean? And most people like learn it pretty fast, that if you have it so like instead of orbiting around, if it actually looks directly, it's like hideous and unsettling, like it'll make you sick to your stomach. So how I have that set up is that we have, make sure we have the right stuff here. You know, my camera's here, it's settling on the target, which is a transform target. So the transform is like its position, its 3D position in space. Then the rig's out here, but most of my transforms are still going to be like rotating this around. So when I, you know, use the right stick and rotate it around, you know, I'm rotating this central object here, but the rig is pushed out, you know, right here. It's the Z is at -8 in local position, and it just sort of stays there. So I can just rotate this around, and it'll just maintain that orbiting behavior. You know, I've tried things where, you know, I have that as a target, the rig position as a target, and the cameras sort of follow that. But when you orbit quickly around, you know, we go like this, the camera will cut across when it's easing. You know what I mean? So, so this is like, you know, the setup that I've found that works really well. And you'll see it a lot. And you'll see some that are a little bit different, and maybe they'll work better for you, but this is what works for me. So how do we get that set up? So, or what's actually happening, I guess. So one of the variables here is the cam distance. It's one of the main things for like determining like one of the feel of your camera. So up in here, you know, we could change that to 5, and we're a lot closer here. Again, what that does, it just takes the, you know, the rig's local position and just sets it there. It's real simple. You know, there's not much easing going on there. What provides a lot of the feel. We also have an offset here. It's a transform offset. You know, I have it set up a little bit higher. That's going to depend on your game, you know, where you want it. You're going to adjust that based on your cam distance here. You know, again, depending on the game, you may want to cut off a lot of this screen space down here behind you. It can be really nice. You open up like a lot of space up in here. But I found that when I'm doing combat and stuff, you know, for my particular game, you know, I'm like right here, and it's like I can barely see the enemy. So if I reset things more to like how I had it, you know, I'm kind of losing space in the exploration parts of the game. And you could change it. You could have it like an exploratory cam, where it cuts off more here so you can see more of the world above and front. But when I'm fighting a bunch of dudes, having this little bit of extra space goes a long way, being able to see more enemies and things like that. So go through here. So that's the main thing. So what's actually happening? So in our update, you know, we have our transform target. Delete this when you're doing it yourself, because, you know, this is like a game specific code here. You can just do it in the start, you know, your main character, however you get your main character. You can assign it in the editor too by dropping it in here. So orbit view. It's our first main thing. What it's doing, this is pretty complicated. You could probably clean this up a little bit, but it's taking, you know, your horizontal axis that you set up, you know, in your Unity editor. Go edit, project settings, input. I'm not gonna go through all the stuff on how to set that up based on what controls you have. It's like annoyingly complicated. Hopefully you just have that set up already. I think you can just use like horizontal by default if you have an Xbox controller. Like you type in literally, I think it might be called that. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that one. You know, I have it set up right stick X, right stick Y, left stick X, left stick Y, things like that. You know, right in here. I guess I could just show it real quick. If you're using an Xbox 360 controller. So these are it's the 4th and 5th axes. And then X-axis, Y-axis. Oh, it's a little bit weird. Because then you have like other axes which are like your triggers. Because, you know, those are analog. Anyway. So overview. What's happening is that we push it left or right or up or down. You know, we have these target, orbit, horizontal, target, orbit, vertical, plus equal. You know, we just keep adding it. Um, based on rotation speed, you could just set it on a basic level with just a rotation speed, which we have set up here. But I also add a little bit of a boost. So rotation accel adds to the boost if we're like moving, if we're orbiting the camera. The boost, then increases gradually. So it means if you really want to swing it around fast, it just gives you a little bit of extra boost if you hold it down. How it can be cleaned up is that I don't have separate values for each direction, or even for separate axes. So if you're like going right and then hit up, that boost is still there, so the up will go up really quickly. It's not a huge deal. I haven't run into any issues. If we hit the dead zone, which is, just if you're not familiar with dead zones with your sticks, most people intuit it even by the name, where it's like, gosh, how do I even explain it? But it's like, you ignore tiny bits of movement, like on the stick, especially as, sticks get older and they jiggle around a little bit. You'll want those dead zones there. So anyway, we go into the dead zone and we turn off the boost there. I also have a max set there. The vertical orbit, the up and down, is clamped. That's so, if you go up and you orbit around, you're going to get upside down. Do you know what I mean? Like if you just are rotating strictly vertically and you didn't have, a way to stop it, then you'd go all the way around and then you would end up being upside down. And you'll also see in games where I don't have it set up, I might change it. Some of it is just by accident almost, where I don't have collision set up on my camera yet. So as you go down here, you'll hit the floor, and so you'll just sort of slide in there. Anyway, what happens a lot of times, like you look up and you'll get closer to the character, so you kind of see more up above. Some people have it for looking up like this, where it zooms out more as well, which can be kind of nice. I hope to implement that as well sometime. Focus target thing we'll get to later. Here's my actual implementation, and why I do it. So I have these orbit H and orbit V, and those are our pure actual orbit values. The target ones, it's something I use a lot, where it's like I have a target so I can do some easing. So I have an orbit speed, and my general way of doing easing is target minus current and then multiplied by a value. And then it's a low value, less than one value. One would make it strictly just do it, like there wouldn't be any easing. I do this orbit H and orbit V so that I can do, it's easy to intuit, but also we do it with Euler rotations because we're just doing, it's hard to explain. Quaternions are really complicated and I don't know everything about it. I don't know a lot about them. But basically it lets us do it so it does it in a way that you think, where if you hit left and right, it'll just go along those single axes. If not, you can get some weird behaviors where the quaternion will sort of ease in between those two values and not get what you think you want, or what you thought you were going to get. There's some ways where you can do it, just doing some built-in quaternion stuff and still do some easing, but this made more sense to me. Look at offset stuff, it's a little bit complicated. I'm not going to explain it too much. A lot of other camera things explain it better. What this does is, let's see, where is it in the code? So right here. If you don't know, in Visual Studio, if you just click on a method or a variable, it'll highlight all instances of it. And I knew it did it, but I've been using it a lot more recently. It's really helpful. You can ignore this focus target stuff. It's very small implementation that you can mess with, but it's just on its way currently. This is supposed to be a little bit more basic, so I just want to cover that. How to explain it? It basically, like, it takes your position, or like you're looking. I'll just show what it does. Like, and I'm kind of forgetting some of what it does, so that's why I'm like at a little bit of a loss. So I have this orbit help here. I'll turn it up all the way, and so when I go to the right, you can see that the camera. I'm not touching the camera controls at all. A game that immediately comes to mind is Metal Gear Rising. It has this turned up really hard. So what it does, and I kind of force it. This is a little bit different than a lot of other implementations. You can get some like bad behaviors when you're in these extremes. You can see the camera is like rotating a bunch. But basically it's like, you know, as I rotate to the right, it kind of trails behind a little bit. I found that like during combat and stuff, it's really bad, and so like a more static camera is a lot more fun. But again, like during exploration stuff, you may really like this. Again, it's in Metal Gear Rising, so you know, it's like I don't have to touch the camera much. I get some like nice movement, just like following my character. You can get this incidentally based if you implement your easing in certain ways. So what happens is like your character will move to the right, and the camera trails behind, but still wants to look at the camera, and so it kind of is always just being pulled behind you a little bit. I like this implementation because it's a little more direct. I like to just have that control, I guess. But, you know, it's going to depend on your game. So, I've skipped around a bit, and I didn't mean to. But, what's happening is that we have a transform target, and we're actually not doing a look target right now, but we'll get to it. The transform target is the player, right? And so what's happening as I move around in the scene, the camera is just following the character. It's actually easing a little bit, meaning it's not like a direct one-to-one. It's going to depend on your style. It's really close to one-to-one though. You know, again, my easing is 0.75, so you know, if it falls behind, it's actually catching up 75% of the way with the character. You know, if I turn this down, your X and Z are going to want to be the same value. You know, again, this stuff gets whack when that's turned up. You can see the camera's like lagging behind now. We're getting some stuttering because I'm running a lot of stuff right now, so it's going to kind of throw you off a bit. You may like that. It's kind of cool. You know, I'm enjoying it a little bit just looking at it. But in my own testing for my own game, this looks better. So we have the Y value too. So let's turn that back to, you know, similar. Let's hit jump. You can see, you know, in certain games you might want that. If it's more of a platformer, this might feel better. You know, horizontal and vertical movement, you're gonna wanna like really pay attention to what your game needs. I'm gonna go back to mine, turn it back off so you can see the difference. This seems more of like a jump, you know what I mean? Because the camera, I turned it way down at 0.075, so it's, you know, it takes a long time for it to catch up. It lags behind vertically a lot. When the whole world moves up like that, it doesn't feel like a jump, right? Like the character is in the same position on the screen. This way, I'm actually like lifting off in screen space, not just world space. I mean, because when it's here, I mean, clearly, you know, I'm changing world space or whatever. And you may like that better. But for me, the feeling here of it lagging a bit, you know, shows me moving in screen space more. You know, like if we look at our mouse, you can see how I'm moving a lot. And it also, you know, makes it so the screen doesn't move around as much. Again, for like the combat and stuff, for my game, it feels better that way. So I really like having these values, you know, separated out for how the camera, you know, translates, how it follows, how it eases in to the character. Let's see. We've talked about the offset a bit. You know, again, we have that rig set up, so you may think, well, why don't we just, you know, use the offset? You know, this is like a more strict sense of forward and back. And so you can see as we orbit, you can understand the difference, right? How it's more strictly just front and back. And so that's not exactly going to work. But you can also use it for stuff like this. I don't have a good implementation for it, but you know, over the shoulder is becoming popular. Let's turn this up. It's a little claustrophobic, but you get the idea. We do stuff like that. Let me see here. Offset. Your rotation speed is just how fast that goes around. It's going to be up to you. Oh, invert values. It's just 1 or -1. You can't see it, but it's. Make sure those are working. I like it so up looks up, down looks up. You know, again, that's preference. But these look Euler values, that'll be deleted. That was a different thing I was just trying out right before here that wasn't quite right when I wanted to show the look target stuff. So we'll do that right now. So we'll go ahead and grab this wood boy and make him our look target. It's not implemented by default. I found that, like, you could probably find your own implementation where you always have, like, your transform and look target are always kind of different. But I found it better if I only do it during certain modes. So we'll go ahead and turn on focus target. And so now, as we move around, we're focusing on our wood boy up there. And I also have it so I can still do the up and down if I wanted. It gets a little bit weird where if you want to do left and right, I have it turned off now. You may think it might be straightforward, but when you do your own implementation, if you want to mess with it, you know, it gets really weird. If we're orbiting around but still looking, you know, at a target that we're not orbiting around, it gets really funky. So that's where it's going to be. I found that there's no like universal stuff. I mean, maybe there is. Maybe there's like a universal way you could set it up. But it gets so game dependent and situation dependent that I found it easier to keep it separate and keep it more strict, like in certain modes, things like that. So basically, what it's doing is that when that's on, we're just multiplying it by the vertical here. If you can add the horizontal here, and there's an actual better way to do it, but it's for whatever reason, how I have it set up, is actually tilting on the z-axis, which is, if you don't know what that is, that's like, you know, our view is like turning this way. That's bad. Like, you generally don't want that, only for like extreme, like weird effects and stuff. So make sure I'm not missing out on anything. I guess we'll just hit up the movement here. Note here, this code is untested. I'm doing it my major like character control, you know, method or script, which is huge. So this one I'm providing here is untested. So if you have any issues, just contact me. Hopefully it works. It should work fine. The meat of it here is this camera relative velocity. It returns a vector 3. You could set it up however you want, but what the vector 3 is the y is zeroed out, and so it's returning an x and z value based on your left stick input, or whatever you put. You know, by default it's left stick. Your input, a twin axis input, or 2D axis input, I guess. You know, it takes that, returns it into a lateral vector. And then in the code itself, we, you know, have a velocity value. We plus equal it, that part's important, times our move speed. And then in our own physics thing here, we scale it with friction. You know, it's going to depend on your own implementation. Just for a quick setup though, I have it, if you have a controller on there, just do a basic, or it's actually complex move, I forget what they call it, but it's not their basic one. Anyway, you know, it does some fancy stuff for when, you know, your stick is 2D, but we're kind of moving in 3D, right? So as we rotate this around and hit left and right, we want it to go in different ways. This is another reason I have this weird look at offset implementation. In other implementations I've seen, people do a bit of correction in the movement methods here, and I don't like that. I want this to be like really strict. I want to get my strict literal 3D lateral translation of my 2D stick input, you know what I mean? And so they do a bit of like, I don't even know how you describe it, but you know, that helper thing I talked about here, you can mess with the orbit help, where it orbits around automatically a little bit. Anyway. So yeah, I mean, there's not much to explain here. It's a little bit messy how I implemented it. Again, this was just like a quick port over, but I wanted to just do a quick 3D camera, and then I was like, well, you gotta have the 3D movement in there too. So velocity help is kind of like our return, or it is our return. Stick help just grabs your stick info here. You know, get access raw left stick, X and Y. We only do it if we're out of the dead zone. If stick help.square magnitude is greater than 1, stick help.normalize. If you just do stick help.normalize by itself, maybe I'm doing something wrong. But I found that to only normalize it if the square magnitude gets greater than this certain value, or greater than 1, you know. Anyway, it's if you normalize it all the time, it's like the low values don't work right. It's weird. So for velocity direction, we take our camera transform.forward. You know, this is going to be the same camera here. You can, if you don't know, you can do camera.main. We just set that early up here, and it's going to depend on your game how you set it up. So we take the forward and we zero out the Y, because our Y is going to be, you know, our camera looks down, so now our Y is actually forward. So we're just going to zero that out. We're just going to grab like sort of the main forward lateral, and we normalize that, and we take our return vector here, increase it, you know, plus equal that times the vertical value of our stick. And then we do something similar here, where we grab, you know, dot right, you know, camera transform dot right, times stick help dot x. This works, you know, we don't have to worry about left and right because we're multiplying it by stick help dot x. So if it's getting negative, then this negative right will turn, or this positive right will turn negative. You know what I mean? And then we zero that out again because I only want the lateral movement. If you're doing some sort of 3D move, you're gonna get weird stuff anyway because you only have two. With a single stick, you only have two axes. So if you're throwing in a third axis, you know what I mean, axis, you're gonna get some whack stuff. Turn vector 3 here. Up here, I talk about in my own code. I use 3 separate floats for velocity because you have to do like current velocity plus equal. Well, this is for the gravity, but because in Unity it's like you have to modify vectors by vectors. You can't just like do the single like vector, current velocity dot x plus equal. I don't know. They have their reasons. I'm sure there's a good reason. I just don't know what it is. I've read on it, but I don't totally get it. We'll check, see if anyone's watching. We have a viewer. Thanks for joining us. I wonder if it's myself. It might not be. That ought to do it. In this implementation, this will be a separate thing, but if I do like a more strict like character movement game feel video, I mainly just wanted those 2 implementations in a quick spot. I want to do a quick video because I'm still sick. I missed the video last week. I'm real sorry. Again, let's just go through it all real quick. Main thing in this is a Unity implementation. You're going to want to make a new object with the camera script on it. It's going to want a child called the rig. And you can call it what you want because you'll assign it. It has a child. Again, I have it as another child. You could throw the camera right on there if you wanted. But I have it as a child because I do screen shakes that modify this position. That way the rig position doesn't get messed up. This rig's in a really, it's like, it kind of needs to be a bit strict. It has to keep that cam position so that when we do all of our orbiting and easing and things like that, that orbit feel is still there. We talked about in the beginning how that needs to stay out there. It can't ease through. Like if we orbit it around and ease through it, it wouldn't be an orbital easing. It would be more of a translation. Like we're cutting across, and we don't want that. That orbital feel is really important for like a nice feeling camera. There's gonna be exceptions, obviously. Like any, there's always exceptions, but it's pretty like, I don't know. Cameras are like, I don't know. There's a lot of good rules of thumb for cameras, so that one I recommend too. Wanted to cover the screen shake really quick. I don't know. I just feel like that's for another video. Set up your axes. You need to edit project settings input. It takes our right stick, rotates around. Your transform target is your main character generally. I think I actually forgot to mention that in the beginning. You can set that automatically here. You're going to want to delete your own delete these, put in your own code, or you can assign it in the editor. What the camera does then is it follows. Right here. Is that the right one? Yeah, translate. So its position plus equal, and I'm scaling it here, but it's transform target, which is our main character. This is a little more complicated because we're doing the translate speed stuff, transform, and the transform offsets. So you have to do kind of like some weird stuff so that the transform offset is relative to where we're looking now. You could maybe parent it in a way so you could just have some like local like offset stuff. So that way, if the parent, rotates around or whatever, these are still relative. Or, they get transformed to the parent. And then are just, strictly forward and back. But anyway, that's so, if we move to the X to the left here, if we rotate around, it's still relative to the actual character target. You know what I'm saying? And then there's some easing, translate speed. That's what all this other nonsense is. So we translate, that follows the character. Again, I personally have the Y translate a lot slower, so I get that game feel of my character actually moving in screen space. Orbit view, I translate second. I think this part was important. It might not be. Orbit view just orbits the rotation is happening to this, the parent, and then again the rig has this strict position which gets set, based on cam distance. You could ease that if you wanted. You're probably not going to be changing that too much. And we went through all this. Nothing much else there to mention. Give this a shot in your own game. Let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully this is helpful for you. Thanks for your support. Patreon has been very generous to me. I mean, not them, but you, the patrons, supporters of Culture Tech Studio. It's been really dope lately. Like, thank you all so much. I guess I'll mention again, when I was first setting this up, it was, I just racked my brain over, like, different rewards and things like that. But, like, one of my core values has been to, like, share knowledge, open code, open source, open knowledge, open assets even. Generally, my assets are for educational purpose only. Sorry, you can use the code, but please make your own games, you know what I mean? Make your own art. But it's there to study if you need it. These will be made available in the video description on the website. It's usually, I think it's under tylerdoak.com/culture-tech/assets. Is that where it is? Anyway, it'll be out there. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit because I'm sick and I'm a little bit lightheaded still and weird. Thank you all so much. Let me know if you have questions. Give this a shot. Thanks again. The support's been amazing. Let me know what stuff you want to see. Yeah, if not, it's going to be more visual effects stuff, little code snippets. Thanks again. I'll talk to you later.